Morning, everyone. We'll get started. Feel free to finish up getting your coffee or whatever. This is not the interesting part of the conversation. That will come in a few minutes. Good morning and welcome. I'm Brian Nelson, the Vice President of Institutional Advancement here at Dunwoody. On behalf of Dunwoody and its Alumni Association, it's truly my pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Teddy Bekele. Teddy serves as Chief Technology Officer at Land O'Lakes, leading Land O'Lakes ag tech and IT organizations. Teddy is responsible for developing and implementing technology solutions for retail and farmer customers to help them produce more sustainable outputs. Teddy's application of technology and data to the practice of farming has shaped many product offerings. Teddy holds an MBA from Indiana University and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from North Carolina State. He also serves as chair for the FCC and USDA Task Force on Precision Agriculture Connectivity, chair for the Minnesota Broadband Task Force, and a director on the board of Stella Health. He's been featured in several publications and programs including 60 Minutes, you survived that, didn't you, right? BBC, Fortune, MIT Sloan Management Review, and Innovate Minnesota. This morning, Teddy will highlight technology advancements in agriculture. Please help me in welcoming Teddy.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I made it up here, did not trip. That's good. It's a good start. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So who's excited to talk about farming this morning? A few hands. Who's excited about food? All right, there we go. They're kind of tied together a little bit, so we'll get into that. All right, so Land O'Lakes. We'll talk a little bit about the organization today. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about me. Is this slide freaky? My assistant says it's a little creepy, like Halloween or something. It's roots in the ground. It's roots of a plant that are in the ground, and we'll talk more about that here in a second. My name is Teddy Bekele. I've been the Chief Technology Officer at Land O'Lakes for about almost 4 years now. Been at the company about 9 years. And prior to that, I had no agricultural professional anything, right? So I was mainly in industrial manufacturing. As you heard, I'm a mechanical engineer. That's what I went to school for. I thought I was going to design cars and moving vehicles. That's not what I ended up doing, and then I got into tech during the early 2000s, and I never looked back. And so I've been doing technology for a very long time in that space. Now, one of the things when I say I had no agricultural background, it's not exactly true. My dad was a farmer. I was born in Ethiopia. He farmed 400 acres of corn, wheat, and cotton. He lost his land during the late 70s when a dictator took over the country and nationalized it. But then he continued to work in agriculture, and he bought agricultural products from Europe and sold them to Eastern Africa. We lived for about a decade in Italy, and then in the mid-90s, early 90s, we actually moved to the United States, to North Carolina for agricultural reasons. So when I was going to college, trying to make a decision on what to do, I remember we had this really serious conversation, right? Like we sat down and he said, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you finish college and all that, right? And I thought it was a question, and I had all these like big dreams I'm going to tell him about, but it was really a rhetorical question. So he said, let me tell you what you're not going to do. You're not going to do music, because you're not very good. It didn't quite sound like that when you translate it. It was a little bit harsher than that. And then he also said, don't get into agriculture, right? And because for the decade, he loved farming. He loved everything about agriculture, but he struggled throughout the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. And the last thing he wanted was his kids to go do anything around agriculture. So he said, go be a lawyer, go be a doctor, whatever you want to do, just nothing related to ag, nothing in farming, right? And that was the only thing we agreed upon. I'm like, yes, never. Don't you worry about that. So that's why I went into engineering and then tech. But then it's interesting enough, like 9 years ago, I had this opportunity come up, and and I was like, Land O'Lakes. I remember when they recruited us, like, yeah, we make delicious dairy products, and I'm like, okay, how much tech is really in that? There's a lot of it, but at the time, I didn't know any better, right? And then they say we make animal nutritional products, et cetera, and I'm like, okay, cool. And then they're like, oh, but our big thing is we're in ag. We do agriculture on a big scale. It's like that was not a selling point for me, right? But I've been in the industry now for 9 years, bringing tech to agriculture, and it's been so rewarding. It's one of the most noble industries there is. I enjoy my time every single day there. The people that I work with really care not only about their land, they care about their families, they care about the food they produce, they care about, you know, the kind of the bigger society, they care about passing the land over to the next generation, leaving it in a better condition that they found it. So it's been extremely rewarding to be able to be around folks like that, and then to be able to bring technology to that space and advance it has really been a blessing for me. So I encourage all of you, like today maybe we'll give you a little bit of an inspiration to get into food and ag, but if you haven't thought about it, and we'll talk about tech, if you obviously have a passion for tech, those two intersections are really, really exciting. So going over to Land O'Lakes, like I mentioned it a little bit, but who's Land O'Lakes? And you know Land O'Lakes butter, we love it. You know, if you buy it at the store, we love you for it as well. But our company really starts on the field and starts with the soil and starts with the seed that goes into the soil. So Winfield United is a crop inputs business. We buy seed, crop protection, and plant nutrition products from large manufacturers like Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva, and then we sell that to ag retailers that then sell that to row crop farmers. Purina, most people know Purina for the dog and cat. We don't have the dog and cat. That's actually owned by Nestle. Purina used to be its own company and then got split up. And so Land O'Lakes took every other species except for dog and cat in North America. Cargill took everything international, and Nestle took the dog and cat piece. Now, interesting little fact here. All three companies still have to maintain the same brand, the same font, with the same color palette. Cannot change that, and that's in perpetuity. So we actually, the three organizations, whether we love or hate each other, have to come together and figure out how to make Purina work for the forever. And obviously then you have Land O'Lakes brand, so that's dairy products, butter, cheese, refrigerated snacks that you find in the grocery store, that all of you purchase on a regular basis. And then the fourth business unit is what's called Truterra, and it's the newest business unit, and it's around environmental sustainability. So it's sustainability across our business units, and it's sustainability into the depth of our business units as well. When I say across, what do I mean by that? Land O'Lakes is a farm-to-fork, farmer-owned cooperative. And I use those words very intentionally, right? So farm-to-fork. Seed goes into the ground, it grows. Corn, soybeans, canola, wheat, all that comes out of the ground, turns into grain. That grain is a raw ingredient for animal formulation. Corn and soybeans being the two biggest things you put in an animal formulation. So we use that for animal formulation. That's fed to animals. One of the major species that we have are cows, right? So the dairy producers buy that feed and they feed their cows, and then those cows produce milk. We buy that milk back from those producers. We turn it into butter and cheese, and you buy it at the store. So farm to fork, on a big scale, we actually have it end to end. So when you look at that value chain, how do you make sure that the sustainability is ingrained into the practices farmers use? How do we make sure that in our facilities we have the best quality that goes through it, and we make sure we use sustainable practices, and to make sure that, like, you know, nutritious and sustainably grown food shows up at the grocery store for all of you to consume. So that's the farm to fork piece. The farmer owned, we're a cooperative. I'm not a publicly traded company. The board is made up of 20 individuals, 9 dairy producers, and 11 ag retailers. Remember, those are, on one side there are suppliers, so they supply us the milk. Those are the 9 dairy producers. But there's 2,000 of them, and the 9 are the elected leaders of that. And then there's about 1,000 or so retailers, ag retailers, which we sell a lot of these agricultural products and animal formulations to. And so those are the other side of our membership. So truly on the board, we have farmers, and then we have retailers that they themselves are cooperatives and owned by farmers. So truly a farmer-owned, farm-to-fork cooperative. So it's an interesting model. And then the application of technology goes along kind of the whole spectrum. And what I do is, when I'll show you, is a little bit of technology we use across the board in all of the business units here. So one of the areas we specialize on, though, is the creation of really, really curated data that then we use for our systems and tools. So we have these things called answer plots, and this is in our Winfield United business. And what they do is they plant every single seed variety that's out there in different soil types, in different climates. So we have 115 of these plots throughout the country. And then we collect all the information about how that plant performs different climate, with different practices, et cetera. And so that data then we make it available through technology tools to the retail seller, which is an agronomist, that works with farmers on how to best advise them what to do when you have this type of ground. This is how you should put the seed into the ground, this is how you should curate it, and all that kind of fun stuff, right? We also have labs where the soil may come back and we test the soil to be able to look at the minerals in the soil, the macronutrients, the micronutrients, and how to adjust things on flight. So this creation of data that's curated is super important for what we do going forward, which is apply some really interesting technologies, right? And you see a lot of these words, and you'll hear them in the classrooms, right, about like intelligent edge and machine learning and artificial intelligence and computer vision. So I'll bring a little bit of that to life of what happens in agriculture with these technology tools. But really, that data creation that I talked about earlier, which then that data, we're also passing that to farmers to be able to create that data, so then we can use it. Then we apply some interesting technologies from there. So there's some interesting tools we've developed over time that are super interesting. So you see this graph in the middle, for example. It's a modeling tool. So we can go to a farmer, and as long as we collect the proper information from that field and apply our knowledge to it, we can almost tell them where the yield's going to end throughout the season. Right? So the yield is, you collect the grain that comes off of that field, and it's measured in bushels, which is about an 8-gallon drum, and we can say how many bushels per acre they can get out, and we can predict that right from the very start of the season, and then as they go along, and depending on what Mother Nature gives us, is it too wet, too hot, too cold, too dry, we take all that into account, and as that goes on, so you need to put more nitrogen into the ground at this moment because the plants are ready to uptake that. Or you should stop putting nitrogen into the ground because all it's going to do is leach out into the ground and go into the waterways. So these types of graphs, now the farmers don't have to interpret this. This is an expert seller that would be able to talk through this graph and be able to tell them this is what's going on. If you have a pivot, for example, in the south where you have irrigation, it's a good time to turn the pivot on, or no, there's enough moisture into the ground that you don't need to turn the pivot on. So this is the type of technology that we could apply in these different areas. The graphs that you see on the bottom right, those are things about the information that comes out of those plots, those research plots. Right? The bars tell you, how a specific variety of seed will perform in a different type of soil, depending on the type of application you put on, right? And then on the bottom right, is we actually test out new technology. So we've been playing around with HoloLenses and sort of augmented reality. So one of the most effective things we've been doing for decades now is we have in these plots, we would bring farmers and some of these agronomists out and show them like, here's how we treated this plant. And then we go out to the field and we take out the corn stalk and look at the roots, and we say, look at the root system. That's the thing you saw earlier, right? The depth of the root system tells you how healthy the plant is and how it absorbs water and nutrients and all that type of stuff. And we used to put it on a piece of paper, and like as you can see down here, it's maybe a little hard to see, but there's a little thing down here with the, we used to put it on the ground and the paper, and then we'd look at this root system, and people would love that, and they really got why certain applications did what they did. Well, you could actually recreate that using a hologram. Right? We have all that data, we have all that information. So now instead of having to, go out into the field, we can actually have these conversations when it's winter, like it has been for the last 6 months, right? Where the corn is actually not into the ground, and we can have these conversations about how to manage that field going forward. So we can have those types of conversations early on, which is super exciting. Or better yet, that one that I found to be super fun is actually you can go out to the field and have the glasses on and look at the real plant and then look at the hologram. And then say, this is how this looks versus how it should look, right? And here's where the deficiencies were, and here's what happened. And that's a much stronger and much fun more application, well, on top of putting the glasses on and watching everybody struggle with it. But yes, we're still got a little ways to go from the technology, but it's still a lot of fun to play with it. And then, but the ag space is really exploding with technology, right? And this is exciting. I'm going to show you this video. There's a little bit of sound, and I'll talk over it. But this is how you apply machine learning, right? The idea that and computer vision to a real problem. So this is something that John Deere, for example, has been working on taking, when I say the plant comes out of the ground, weeds are the worst thing that could happen, right? And it's not because they're bad or they look bad. They do look bad when you have a nice clean field, but they also absorb the nutrients and the water from the plants, right? So what should go into the plant actually ends up into the weeds. So eliminating the weeds becomes a bigger deal. So instead of applying crop protection, or what people call fungicide and all those types of things onto the field, like fungicides, pesticides, insecticides, which everybody thinks is a bad thing. But in farming, the reason you do it is to eliminate the weeds, right? But if you could just target the weeds, right? If you could just target the weed itself and not the overall plant, that would not only is more sustainable farming practice, but it's also a better way for conserved dollars if you think about it from a farmer standpoint. That application is really expensive across the field. If it's done in specific spots, then it makes a difference. So let's play that video again, and I want to show you now that I kind of explained that, really what's going on. So the idea is let's identify the plant or the weed. So that's a pigweed. So what you do is you feed the machinery with a lot of those images, right? So it recognizes what pigweed is. And then as the tractor goes down the road, you have a camera that's attached to the back and starts to look at these plants. And as it identifies what it is, then it opens the nozzle and it sprays the plant. Right? So that's where you see like a little bit of, that's where good. And so the little green thing here shows, it's like, yep, found the weed and we applied it into the right spot. So, and now this was at the research about 18 months ago, and now John Deere's got this product actually into the market, which is super exciting. Other things, these are things we played with. I think the sound on this one doesn't work, but you know, as a farmer, when you wake up every day, you want to know a couple of things. Number one, what's the weather like? They have like 7 weather apps on their phone. Why do they have 7? Because not all 7 say the same thing. So triangulate is not a good word. They use all 7, and they're like, okay, if you put it all together, I think it's going to be like this today. Right? So they really, I mean, seriously, they go through it that way because weather has a huge, huge impact on what to do on a given day. Right? Depending on how many inches of rain or even a quarter of inch of rain, this field get it, that field not get it. This means I can plant this field, but I cannot plant the other one, so I'm going to wait a couple more days, et cetera. Do I apply nutrients to this field or not? I don't want it to leach into the ground, so weather is a big deal. That's the number one thing they look at. Number 2 things they look at is commodity prices, right? So as a farmer, you not only have to know agronomic practices on how to manage the crop, but you also have to sell the crop. And the prices change, and you can lock in rates early, you can lock in the middle of the season, and you can do all sorts of interesting things. So what they do is they always look at the commodity prices to see where they need to be locking prices. So they're almost like marketers in a way. And then the other thing is, how are my fields doing that day? So what we've done here is, instead of them having to go app to app to app, the idea is you open up one thing and then you hit go, and then the machine will just automatically speak to you and say, today the weather is 70 degrees, it's the wind is blowing at this speed, here's the moisture and the pressure outside, the markets today for corn and soybeans are this much and that much, and then obviously here are the 6 fields today that you need to pay attention to. These 2 are nitrogen deficient, these 2 are phosphorus deficient, this other one is boron deficient. And again, this is all using a lot of the technology we talked about earlier with remote sensing and the modeling, et cetera, and they can speak to you, and so now you can absorb that information and then do something about it. So putting things like this in the hands of farmers makes them a lot more efficient, makes them a lot more effective in their day. Now, one of the things that, and American farmers are way ahead of where the rest of the world is, right? They are sort of the model of like, as long as they're progressive, and a lot of them are, and implementing, getting the latest equipment, using technologies, using agronomists for their expertise and their help, they really do elevate the production. And just to give you an idea, I talked about those bushels per acre. The average in the 1980s was about 105 bushels per acre for corn, right? Today, it's 180 bushels per acre. That's the average, right? That's a huge increase from where they were about 20, 30 years ago. And it's almost like having that big of an increase, it's almost like having 30 million more acres of land. I mean, if you just think about that, right? So with the same amount of land, they've actually been able to produce more. Now, the rest of the world's not there. So from a production standpoint and making the most out of the land, they're there. But the next piece they really care about is the environment. And it doesn't seem, I mean, a lot of times farmers may look like they don't care about, they actually deeply do care about the environment because it impacts what they do every day, as you saw about the weather, and they care about the soil, right? Because now if they leave the soil in worse conditions than they found it, that's terrible for the next generation to come. 95% of American farms are family owned, which means it's going to go to the next generation. That corporate farming that you hear, there's only a small percentage. Yes, they do have huge acres of land, but the majority, vast majority, are family owned. So the idea about air, soil, and water are key things that they very, very much deeply care about, and they want to be able to put the right practices in place. And so this idea that, you know, the temperature through greenhouse gases is going up every year, and we need to do something about, you know, sort of making sure that we reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases and bring the temperature down by 1.5 degrees, like that is very near and dear to farmers, and they understand that. Question is how? Right? We're trying to feed everybody. We have, you know, like we've got these practices in place. They've really been optimized in a way, and we continue to optimize them. But what are the right techniques? And this is where the science is now finally catching up. And we've actually poured through our board, pushing us to be able to look at this idea of soil health and air quality, to look at ways to be able to help farmers decipher the practices they should put in place. So what you see here is, I'll direct your attention to the top left. There's a score of 78. So we've actually been able to develop a score from 0 to 100, kind of like a credit score almost, for your field. And the question is, how environmentally sustainable is your field, right? Like, and so in this case, this would be a good one, but then also break down the profits, because it's not just about environmental sustainability, it's also about financial sustainability. I can put all the environmental conservation practices in place, but if I'm in the red the next year, it's gone. The farm's gone, and whatever I did is all out the window. So I've got to be, so being able to break down the profits on a subfield level, so that's what you see on the bottom right there, is super important. Okay, so how do I increase my score? So I'm going to give you an example of how we got to a 78 for this field. So 225 acres here, the yield is about 185. They make about $82 per acre on this field. That's what you see there. Maybe it's hard to see. And then at the bottom, we give them the stewardship score. And you can see most things are in that orange-red category, right? And if you can't see it, soil erosion, soil quality, and emissions are the 3 areas where we measure them on. Soil erosion, your topsoil, which is the most important. How much is that going into the waterways and disappearing? Soil quality, how healthy is your soil to be able to grow the plants? And then greenhouse gas emissions, how much carbon are you releasing into the air, nitrous oxide, et cetera. Now, if you put certain practices in place, cover crops, you could put grass in certain areas of the field, and if you do that, it holds the soil in place, especially when it's close to a river or something like that, so it doesn't fall in, right? Tillage, the tilling practices, right? You turn the soil over when you plant the seed. There's actually techniques you can put in place where you don't till the soil. And why is that important? Carbon is held into the soil, and actually it's the plant that grows that captures the carbon and sequesters it, puts it into the ground. If you don't touch the soil, that carbon stays into the ground. So if you can plant and grow a crop without actually tilling the soil, like you can actually keep that carbon to the ground, and you can actually sequester carbon, right? Which is super interesting. And you put these things in place in the right spots, with the right methodologies, and you will actually, you see all the greens on the other side, right? You'll actually be a net carbon sequester. That's exciting for agriculture. Like, they will be the ones taking carbon out of the air. They can actually take greenhouse gases out of the air, not emit them, like actually take them down, so they can be carbon negative. And farmers these days, with all the companies putting more attention into this, can actually get reimbursed for this. Right? So now you go back to the economics of, like, if you actually do this, there's money out there for you. You can augment what you're doing and be in a better spot. So that's super exciting, and we really do believe that, like, farmers today, and this is kind of bridging now consumers and farmers together, is be able to tell the story. Farmers have, and working with consumers, if the consumers can really get behind of buying the products that these farmers will come off their fields, have the ability to really have an impact on environmental sustainability, which is exciting. Okay, a couple more things we do in technology. Now moving on really to the animal side. This is a fun one. So use computer vision to be able to look at a cow, and there's a little score at the top that tells you if the cow's weight is in the right range. Is it too thin? Is it too big, too fat, or is it just about right? And the reason that's important is you can change the feeding formulation for that cow, for that herd as a whole. So based on the imagery, and you can have them pasture outside, but then all of a sudden when you change the feeding formulations, you could say, well, too much, too little, how do we adjust? More starches maybe less starches, et cetera. So you can use computer vision to do things like that, and these computers can be, or these cameras can be installed either in the barns, or they could be outside where the cows are as well. So that's a little bit of an innovative where you could bring technology to an interesting area. Going a little bit more into the food side, we've also even played around with self-driving trucks. All right, so let me show you this video and we'll talk about it in a second.
This is the future we've been building towards. A world in which innovation is constantly improving our lives. Plus AI has completed the industry's first ever autonomous cross-country commercial freight run in a self-driving truck. Towing a refrigerated trailer filled with over 40,000 pounds of Land O'Lakes butter and only stopping for mandated breaks in a record 3 days. A safety driver and operations specialist were on board at all times to monitor system operations and assume control if needed. True innovation is self-evident in the many firsts that have occurred throughout history, and Plus AI's cross-country journey was a leap forward in demonstrating the maturity, safety, and reliability of self-driving trucks. This is the future waiting for us.
Yeah, so a self-driving truck across the country. Now, a self-driving tractor, that's easy peasy. You know why? Because there's nothing to hit other than plants, which you actually want to hit the plants. So, self-driving tractors have been around for a long time. Deere, Case, AGCO have all done that. Matter of fact, a lot of farmers today the older generation farmers will listen to AM radio and look at the grain markets, et cetera. The younger ones may watch Netflix in there, maybe. But they have lots of screens in there, right? Because the truck drives itself, and they just have to make sure that you don't drive over an electrical pole or something when it makes the big turns. So they're more doing business in the cab itself. The harder part was driving on a road where all the rest of us are driving. That's where, self-driving has been around for a while now. Despite what you hear in the news, it's here, right? The issue is the non-self-driving cars. It's all the people that drive cars that are unpredictable, because the machines are very predictable in what they do, and they can monitor everything. It's the people that are more, decides to change lanes because they were texting or something like that, right? So that's where it becomes unpredictable. So now that's the added technology that puts in there is to make sure that you can account for all those types of things going forward. And if you think about it, it said 3,000 miles, right, in record days. Why is it record? Because really the truck doesn't have to stop. The only reason they made the stops is because the two drivers, and that's why they had two, because that way at least one could sleep while the other one was making sure that nothing bad was happening. But if you think about it, if nobody was in the cab, this thing could go from end to end, no problem. And then parking it, as you saw, that's a huge ordeal. That also could be really automated as well. So some good advancements, but we got a little ways to go. So it's here, but it's not here right now. It's going to take a couple of years, maybe even 5 to 10 years before you really see this into action. But it's really exciting what you could do with a lot of that artificial intelligence that's coming around. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is a little bit this idea of food traceability. I talked about all those sustainability practices farmers put on their field, which is super exciting. But at the same time, this idea that can you trace it all the way back is still something we're trying to pursue because grain gets mixed as you go along. And grain, that's maybe a little bit harder to comprehend, but I'll take milk. Two dairy producers, when we go do milk runs, we go to one and go to the next one and go to the other one. Well, if you want to know which cow did your stick of butter come from, it's been mixed many, many times along the way between two dairy producers, between cows, when it gets down to the creamery with all the different sheds that come together. So it's really hard to dissect that. But that's the idea. Can we actually go back and trace it back? Now, it will cost more, which we don't want to make food more expensive just so you can trace it back. But there's probably ways we could do it over time as we learn better and use technology to be able to do things like that. But to be able to know when there's food spoilage, it's an important one, right? We need to take things off the shelf because the expiration dates are coming. Those are important to do from a traceability standpoint. So the next era really into this food and ag connecting together is this idea of transparency and traceability. So show you one last video and then we'll switch over to questions.
Did you know that globally 1/3 of all food is wasted before anyone can eat it? It's a whole lot of perfectly good nourishment going into the garbage. What if farmers knew exactly how much they needed to grow? What if grocery stores knew precisely how much food to buy? In the next 5 years, IBM researchers will use blockchain technology and artificial intelligence to help dramatically cut down on waste. The blockchain will track food from the farm all the way to your fridge, and that data can be used to predict what customers really want and when they will want it. When farmers and sellers rely more on data and less on guesswork, food arrives fresher, and everything tastes just a little bit better.
So that's the next frontier, and you heard that magic word blockchain. There's still a little bit of a hype, but it can be used, and it can be used to do important things. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and giving me the opportunity to be up here and talk to you a little bit about farming and a little bit about food and the connection between the two. Hopefully gives you inspiration. There's lots of tech happening. Lots of resources are needed. As you can see, like I said, farming doesn't necessarily mean being out in the field and cultivating crops and all that. It actually means developing software that can actually help these farmers be more efficient, monitoring the fields. You don't actually have to be in the field to monitor them. You could be in some sort of a command center. That's where the future of farming is going, so we can actually really all participate in growing food. And hopefully you find that somewhat inspirational, and thank you for your time.
All right, we have some time for questions, so who wants to get started with a question? Anybody out there? Okay. Oh, we'll be over here in a second.
What the heck is blockchain? Hi, Murray Deeth at Sundance. What's blockchain? I don't get it. Help me.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so it's a fancy word, right? And people use it. Cryptocurrency is where people know more, right? Like in the Bitcoins area of the whole thing. And it's really how information is getting transmitted from one entity to another. So, right, two entities are there and they pass information to one another. So there's this interesting technology that helps pass that information, but you don't have to give all the data. Like you can share all the data to the blockchain, but only make certain things visible to the next party that goes on the word, right? So that's really kind of the base concepts of it. So, but it gets used in many different ways. So in cryptocurrency is how we exchange money from one person to another, which is how when you pay with Bitcoins, it's untraceable because you don't have to share everything. You just have to share what you want to share, right? And so therefore, when you want to trace back, that's not known. And so it creates this ledger that's kind of like publicly managed, right? So it's self-controlled ledger by everybody. It's a public blockchain. So that's an interesting way of using it. In our world, it would be a farmer to a trucking industry that picks up, for example, the grain off their fields, to the processor that picks that up, down to the food retailer or the food manufacturer and the food retailer. So how do those all parties collaborate with one another? They all have different systems to run their businesses, right? But can they share data to a common entity that makes things visible throughout the value chain? So that's how it would be used in this way. Smart contracts, which I think is probably the most applicable way of using blockchain, is so let's say you have two parties, like let's say between Land O'Lakes and Microsoft, and Microsoft has to provide Office 365 services to us, right? And our contract is actually a physical document where we sign it at the end of the day, and there's service level agreements in that. You can actually digitize all of that. And then you can tie all that information to the systems that are actually running. And if Microsoft doesn't meet our service level agreements, then the service level, then it kicks in whatever the penalties are. And that's all digitized. Like nobody has to touch it, so it's that exchange of information. So there's many ways to use sort of that digital ledger going forward. So I don't know if I helped there or.
Helps a lot. Is it like an API?
That could be used to be able to send the information. So it's just like a layer. So you have all these systems, and you can connect the systems through APIs, right? Or you can have a layer on top that sits. Okay. And then you connect up to this thing, and then it makes information available across the chain.
Yeah, I think we had one over here, didn't we? Was there somebody's hand up? We'll be over there in a second.
Okay, there we go. How accepting are farmers of virtual reality technologies?
How accepting are farmers of virtual? I would say how accepting are farmers of any technology, right? Let's start there. Not very accepting at first. right? You know why? Because a lot of them, there's a lot of people that drive up there to the farm gate and that are selling them like things that they don't need. And this has been happening for decades and maybe even centuries. So and by the way, they take all the risk, right? So you hear the term betting the farm. Like it literally, you're betting the farm every single year you're farming, right? And so they're very cautious about where they put their dollars and what they try. Now, once you can demonstrate to them the value that the technology brings, right? Virtual, blockchain, artificial intelligence, whatever, and you can see how it makes their work easier, more efficient. It helps them make better decisions on a day-to-day basis. It helps them reduce their risk and helps them improve the quality of their soil or whatnot. Then they're very accepting, and then they'll embrace it big time. Like they'll embrace it big time because they'll make it part of what they do every single day. So really, the hurdle is walking through the noise of all the mess they hear every day and really demonstrating what the value is to them on the other end. That's really the answer to it.
He actually stole my question. I was going to ask you, what percentage of the American farmer uses this technology and this advanced technology?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I would take, let's say usually there's an ag retailer that works with the farmer, right? And if you take that ag retailer, let's say they have about 100 farmers they work with on any given day. So you would have 15% of farmers that are extremely ahead of, do this. Matter of fact, they're even ahead of the ag retailer or anybody else. They just in general are those pioneers that try all kinds of stuff. So there's 15 of them that are gonna be, if anything, you just have to get out of their way, right? They're gonna test all the new stuff. Then you have this portion of 60% of them, right, that are in there, that are, I would say, are in the middle of the bell curve, right? That are in different levels of maturity. I would say a good portion of them use probably in one shape or form some of these technologies, right? So they're kind of there and they're dabbling with it and getting better. And then there's another 15% or so, or another 15 of them that are, nope, not doing anything. And those are probably likely to disappear. They don't have anybody else taking the land over them. They know once they're done with it, they're gonna sell the land or somebody else is gonna operate it. So, so they're just sort of riding it and then seeing where it goes. So that's usually the breakdown. Now, so the goal is for us, what we focus on is that 60. Those 60 farmers are at different levels and being able to demonstrate to them how they can incorporate what they're doing into their everyday work. That's the key, it has to be incorporated into their day. Because if it's extra work, especially I talked about all that data, right? If they have to sit there and enter data into systems, and it's 115 data points per every field, and you have 75 fields, that's not happening, right? Like they don't have the time for that. So it's doing things like that and showing them how you can incorporate into what they do and making it a little bit easier every single day.
Thank you so much for coming in. As someone who grew up on a farm and walking beans, I'm a little jealous of the precision farming of being able to pull out those exact weeds. But what are you seeing in trends or shifts to more no-till farming to conserve and increase the carbon? And are you seeing a lot of farmers being willing to do that if they're not quite seeing, are they seeing an increase in yield or are they not?
Yeah, well, that's a great question and comes because you know a lot of it, right? If there's a decrease in, so we can just go in and be like, okay, no-till, cover crops, that's what you have to do. And then it's like, well, cover crops cost more. Got to pass the field a few more times. Got to figure out what's going on there. No-till, is it going to impact my yield, right? There's all those conversations. So just showing up with this conservation practices is a no-starter. So you got to go in with the whole package, right? And that's where we're kind of shifting, and it's changing the industry, to be honest with you, where it's more of a service package you sell to say, okay, at the end of the day, you are at 170 bushels per acre. I think we can get you to 180 bushels per acre, but here's what we got to do. We're not going to use tillage practices, but we're going to analyze the soil, and based on the soil type, these are the varieties that we should put into the ground, right? Once that comes out, then we got to apply micronutrients on top of it to make sure that that plant is healthy right off the start. So you kind of put all that together, and at the end of the day, it actually might cost more, but the output is that much higher, then they're like, okay, that would make sense. And then you say, oh, by the way, now we can actually calculate your carbon emissions and sequestration as well. And you're actually going to be at a carbon negative. And for that, you can get an extra, $20 an acre or so for the carbon that's been sequestered. And you can sell that into the market if you choose to do so and sign up for the programs that are out there in the market. Then it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because then it just becomes icing on the cake on top of everything else. But you got to go down to the whole deal. You can't just focus on the conservation piece.
Great. Is Land O'Lakes or anyone that you know doing anything for the younger generation in high schools like FFA to get them kind of caught up with some of this technology? Also coming from like a farming family, I look at my nephews who are really interested in farming, but their dad and they're not really into all this. So it's like, is there education kind of in place around this to kind of uplift the youth?
Yeah, we're starting to now work a lot, especially in a lot of these communities, because first of all, if they're in FFA, that's the perfect time because they're still in those communities. Typically what ends up happening is once they graduate high school, like, I'm out and I'm going to go do something else, right? But how do you get them excited just so there's a lot more of these retailers now in their communities are starting to be able to use FFA students, for example, to be able to come and do the precision ag work, right? Not necessarily the walking the fields, which that would have happened before, right? Now, instead of doing that, come actually run some of these drones, for example. Like, we can get you like a license and be able to do that. Come do the modeling piece. You enter the data, right? So a lot of the ag retailers in the communities are starting to be able to employ the students to be able to do that during the school year or even during summer times, right? And I know that a lot of the companies like ours are starting to hire also a lot of interns when they're in college to be able to come do this. So we actually, every single new employee that comes through, the first group they go through is the tech group because that's what they're doing. So that's on the ag side. Now for me, on the tech side, I actually would love to have people that want to do computer engineering, computer science, or even just basic infrastructure and learn, because you could actually do farming without actually having a farming background, but if you have a farming background, that's just even that much better. So we can even get folks that are not coming from those communities to be able to participate, which I think is exciting as well. And to be able to work on projects like this and get them more closer to the food production and the fuel production, the fiber production, et cetera. So.
I'm curious about the sources of revenue for Land O'Lakes. I assume that each farm has to pay some kind of a membership fee, but could you just explain that, please?
Yeah, yeah. It's a cooperative, right? So made up of, so they don't want to pay anything, they don't have to. So the way it works is, there's two types of members. There's the dairy producers and then the ag retailers, right? So the dairy producers, they're a supplier to us, right? So being part of the cooperative means we have to pick up every single milk every ounce of milk you produce, and then we either sell that milk in the open market or we turn it into butter and cheese. And then we pay you a premium for that milk up front, and then once we've done doing all the value add stuff, then we pay you like a patronage on the back end, right? So that's how that works. But then you have to go by producing milk in a certain way. You have to abide by, you can't just produce all the milk you want. Like, we can only take so much in at any given time. So there's rules you have to abide by to be part of this cooperative. And you also have to be in an area where we can actually pick up the milk, right? So if we don't have facilities nearby, that can't be done. So that's typically for a dairy producer, that's where all that comes into play. But they're owners of the company, so they could technically change the rules if they want to. On the ag retail side, they're customers. So now you're buying from us, and your ownership into the company goes up with the amount of inputs that you buy from your national cooperative. So that's the hook on that side of it. So a lot of them can buy anywhere else. They're all independently owned. They can make their own decisions. But the more you buy from the cooperative, the more it's tied in. Now, when you buy it, there may be a certain premium that you have to buy compared to others, like the price may be a little bit higher, but you know it because you're part of this cooperative system, and at the end of the day, we're negotiating on their behalf, and then whatever profits at the end of the day, so Land O'Lakes net profits really goes to a small portion, maybe less than a third, goes to employees because that's part of their bonus structure, and then the rest of it all goes to patronage back to the ag retailers and dairy producers. So That's how the company is structured and set up, and obviously the board is made up of those individuals, so they're the ones that tinker with percentages and all those types of things, and the rules and regulations that everybody has to abide by.
Teddy, thanks for sharing this morning. One of the questions I had is you talked about the increase in output per acre. And I'm curious, certainly that's pulling more nutrients out of the ground. Are there natural ways that that is being replenished, or is most of it a topical application?
No, so it's a great question. So it's a combination of what you put into it, right? So a lot of the fertilization applications that happen in the fall and the spring is really trying to replenish the nutrients in the soil. And what we're trying to do is make sure that those are the same nutrients that then go into the plant. And if you get the right ratio right, you keep the health of, you can actually improve the health of that soil by doing so. So it's really making sure that if you think about the past, people would do, especially in Minnesota because of the winters, all fertility would happen in the fall because right after you harvest, you put all your fertility down, then ice comes and sits on top of it, and then all that water melts, goes into the ground, and then in the spring it's actually ready to plant, right? Theoretically, yes. But the problem is it gets warm during the winter sometimes, and so it melts, and then all of a sudden it's wetter, or the moisture's in the ground sooner than expected. When that happens, then all of a sudden the topsoil starts to move, and it goes into the waterways and rivers and things like that, or it just goes deeper into the ground where the plants can't reach it. So some of the practices we're starting to change for them is don't apply some in the fall to get the ground ready, but the majority should be done in season. So you do it right before you plant, then you plant, and then you got to get the specialized equipment to be able to do it as the season progresses. So you put the nutrients in the ground as the crop starts to come out. That's how you ensure the nutrients are going into the plant, and what you're putting down is going back into the plant. And as you put it down, you can also, that's why we do the soil testing to see where are the deficiencies. Like from where you started to where you are in the middle of the season, what else needs to be in this application to be able to put nutrition back into the soil? Because that's the most, soil health is paramount. That's the one thing that every farmer does and should care about.
Great. Anybody else? We got one more over here. Any over here? Been spending a lot of time on this side of the room.
What are some of the most productive states for Land O'Lakes, and where does Minnesota fit in there?
Good question. Minnesota is high up there, but the weather has an impact for us, right? So, we also have to go by crop, right? So is it corn, soybeans, canola, wheat? So if you're talking about cotton, for example, it's all in the south, right? It's not humid enough here, there's not enough sunlight, there's not enough warm temperature for that to grow. So if we tried to grow cotton here, we'd be doing a poor job at it. The two biggest crops in the United States are corn and soybeans, and that's why you see corn and soybean fields everywhere you drive. And it's not just for food, it's also for fuel, and it's also for animal feed consumption, right? So now when you look at corn, what are the most productive states? Again, in the Georgia, Alabama, maybe a little further north, you get into Kansas, right, Missouri, you can get up to 400 bushels per acre. That's huge numbers, right? But they also have pivots, and then they have that lot of sunlight that hits the plants, so they're able to do that, but with pivots. So there's the water component of it, right? And that's really expensive, so that kind of offsets it. If you strip the water out and said, okay, no pivots whatsoever, then you would see states like Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and Indiana. Those would be the 4 top states that would be the most productive without using a pivot, just giving you what Mother Nature puts in front of you. And they can average, good farmers can average somewhere around 250 to 260 bushels per acre, which is quite impressive.
We got one more up here.
This is a planted question, but I work in HR at Land O'Lakes. So Teddy, can you tell, there may be students who are, I'm excited, I want to work at Land O'Lakes. So in technology, how would you get started? And can you talk a little bit more about the company culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So to get started in technology, you just have to have the passion. Don't need to know anything. We can bring you up to speed on whatever you need to know, whether it's cloud or whether it's application development or whether it's artificial intelligence. Now, all that may take some time to get there, right? But in order to, it's just a passion and the idea that I love this idea of tech. And to be honest with you, we have really good technical people in our company, and then where we're trying to kind of augment more is sort of the connection between our technical team and then the more business side, right, or more of the functional side of our organization. So folks that can make that bridge are really, really, really extremely valuable. So from a technology perspective, that's what we get excited. Now, if you want to dabble around with Internet of Things and sensors, et cetera, awesome. Come over, we'll have lots of fun things to play with. From a culture standpoint, again, we go back to this idea we're a cooperative, right? And the idea that, family matters. So think about farming and sort of that image you have. Family is extremely important. Work-life balance is extremely important, right? And this is one thing that, one of the reasons I thought I was going to come to Minnesota for 3 years and be gone, right? And the reason 9 years later I'm still here is because that idea of being in a family, having good work-life balance, where we want to do the right things. We want to do the right things for farmers because they're the owners of the organization, and making sure that rural communities are vibrant, that maybe some of us may want to move back to rural communities, right? And maybe we came from there, or maybe we aspired to go have a small operation in rural America, which is really exciting. But how do you make sure you have broadband? And how do you make sure that you can get Amazon delivered to you? So those are the types of things that we advocate for on behalf of farmers. But the other side, if you look at the spectrum of where we go, whether you're looking at the animals, which all of you may own animals and you're buying feed for them, or you buy the products at the store, consumers are another big constituent, right? So for us, this idea of connecting consumers and farmers is a big deal. So every single person in here is a consumer. Every single employee of Land O'Lakes is a consumer. So we think of it as kind of making sure that we connect the dots there. And that culture is very much driven by that. So the idea of having diverse representation, making sure we have diversity of thinking, because that's how you bring innovation to the space. Making sure we have entrepreneurship type of mentality and thinking is critical for us. So that's the type of people you would find at Land O'Lakes.
Great. And why don't you join me in thanking Teddy for taking time out his day. Great presentation. Wow. For our students out there, that's the world, right? The technology is changing across all of our programs. It's changing everywhere. I mean, the use of artificial intelligence and virtual reality and the blockchain and all the things that are being done in the ag community are being done across all of our programs. So it's fascinating and great presentation. Also want to thank the Alumni Association for another great year of LEAD speakers. This is our last one of the year. We had a great year and a great way to conclude. So thank you to the Alumni Association for organizing this and putting this on. Thank you everybody for being here. We'll pick back up again in September. First Thursday in September, I think, is September, anybody know? 2nd-ish, right? Somewhere around there. Check your calendars, but we'll pick these back up in the fall. More information will be coming out. Thank you everybody for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.